They told me I was nobody, not his real daughter, just a girl he took in out of pity, and for years they repeated it until I started believing it too. But the truth was buried in money they controlled, trust accounts, signatures, decisions I was never allowed to question. And when I finally pushed back, it did not stay a family problem. It turned into something federal. Records reviewed, statements pulled, everything leading back to one moment, the morning everything broke at 8:42, when the truth hit harder than any accusation ever could, and the woman who controlled my life realized she could not stop it anymore. Because this was never just about family. This was revenge built on truth. And by the time it was over, one of us finally knew who we really were, and the other had nothing left to hide behind. Chapter 1. I remembered the exact moment my mother told 47 people I was never really hers. It was a cool afternoon in October 2024, out at the Whitmore farm, just outside Charlottesville. The kind of day where the air feels thin and everything looks sharper than usual. The fields behind the house stretched out in quiet rows, gold and fading, like they had seen too much and didn't care anymore. Inside, the house was already full. Voices overlapped, low and polite, the way people sound when they know something uncomfortable is about to happen, but no one wants to name it. I stepped in and felt it right away. Conversations dipped, then picked back up. A few people smiled at me out of habit. Others looked past me like I was just another guest. I counted without meaning to. 47. Robert Hale stood near the fireplace holding his old leather folder against his chest. He had handled my father's estate since 2019. Everything had been settled years ago. The trust was clear, the paperwork signed, every asset accounted for. Which meant this meeting had nothing to do with the law. That realization sat heavy in my stomach. My mother, Virginia Whitmore, stood at the head of the room near the long oak dining table, the same table my father used to sit at every morning with his coffee and the local paper folded in half. His chair was still there, pushed in neatly, untouched. No one ever sat in it. Virginia rested her hand lightly on the back of that chair as she spoke, fingers tapping once, then still again, like she was reminding herself to stay measured. James stood beside her, relaxed on the surface, one shoulder angled toward the crowd. He gave a small nod to someone across the room, like this was just another family gathering. I stayed near the doorway, close enough to hear, far enough to leave. Virginia cleared her throat, and the room settled almost instantly. She spoke about legacy first, about responsibility, about preserving what my father had built. Her voice was calm, steady, practiced. People nodded along, some murmuring in agreement, like they had already decided she was right before she finished speaking. Then she said James would oversee the estate moving forward. No surprise there. That had always been the assumption. She paused after that, just long enough for the room to settle into that decision. Then she turned toward me. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to make sure everyone followed her gaze. Ilara is not my biological daughter, she said, her tone even, almost detached. She is not a real Whitmore. The words landed clean. Too clean. Someone near the window shifted their weight. A glass clinked softly against another. I heard a quiet inhale from somewhere behind me. No one spoke. I didn't react right away. I'd known I was adopted since I was old enough to understand what that meant. My birth mother, Claire Dowson, died when I was a baby. My father took me in. That part had always been presented as simple. This wasn't simple. I only kept her because Harold insisted, she continued. She reached out then, adjusting the sleeve of the woman standing closest to her, smoothing it down like it mattered more than anything she had just said. The woman froze, then forced a small smile, eyes flicked toward me before dropping again. Control. Even in that moment, Virginia needed the room to stay exactly how she wanted it. Something inside me went very still. Memory started shifting into place, pieces I had ignored for years. Sitting at the far end of the table during holidays, watching conversations happen around me instead of with me. Report cards placed quietly on the counter, acknowledged with a nod, while James was praised for showing up late to things he barely tried at. learning early that speaking less kept things easier. I used to think it was just her personality, that she didn't know how to show affection. Standing there, I understood something I should have understood a long time ago. She knew how. She just chose not to. I looked around the room, waiting. Karen adjusted her bracelet again, eyes fixed on her wrist. Tom stared at the floor like it held answers he couldn't say out loud. Pastor Michael Reed stood near the hallway, hands folded, expression careful and distant. Not one person stepped forward. Not one. That was the part that stayed with me. Not what she said, but the silence that followed. I heard my own voice before I felt ready to speak. So what's the truth then? It came out steady, which surprised me. Virginia didn't answer. She just looked at me, like the question didn't deserve one. And then I noticed something else. James wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the table, jaw tight, fingers pressing together like he was holding something in place. For a second, he didn't look confident or certain. He looked like he was thinking. Someone near the back mentioned my father's name, Harold, almost casually, like they were trying to pull the conversation somewhere safer. That's when Virginia's hand tightened against the back of my father's chair. It was quick, barely there, but I saw it. The kind of reaction you don't give unless something slipped past your control. I shifted my attention to Robert Hale. He hadn't opened his folder once. He hadn't corrected anything, hadn't clarified, hadn't stepped in the way a lawyer usually would when things started drifting into territory that mattered. He just watched. Which meant, whatever this was, it wasn't about anything written down. It was about what wasn't. The room slowly came back to life after that. Conversations restarted in low tones. People moved, adjusted, pretended there was a version of this moment that made sense. I stayed where I was, listening, to the floorboards creaking under shifting weight, to glasses touching lightly in the kitchen, to the way people avoided my name now that it had been said out loud in a different way. If I didn't belong here, then what had the last 30 years been built on? And if she could stand there and rewrite my place in this family in front of everyone, then what else had she already rewritten without anyone noticing? I looked at James again. He still wouldn't meet my eyes, and for the first time, the thought came through clear enough that I couldn't put it away. Maybe I wasn't the only one in that room whose story didn't line up, because something about this wasn't just about me, and whatever it was, it had been buried long before today.
Chapter 2. By the next morning, I didn't have to look for the damage. It found me. I heard it before I even reached my office. 2 women stood outside the bakery across the street, their voices low, but not low enough. She knew the whole time. And still tried to take everything. I kept walking. Not faster, not slower, just steady, like I hadn't heard a word. Inside my office, everything looked the same. My desk, my files, the framed certificate on the wall. Alara Hayes Accounting. Clean and simple. Built from nothing over 10 years. Every client earned 1 conversation at a time. By 10, the first cancellation came in. No explanation, just a short email, polite and distant. By noon, Lena Brooks was sitting across from me. She had been with me for years. I knew her books better than she did. I knew when her business dipped and when it picked up. I knew how hard she had worked to keep it running. Now she wouldn't meet my eyes. "I think it's better if I move my accounts," she said. "Is there an issue with the work?" I asked. "No," she said quickly. "You've always been solid." "Then what changed?" She hesitated, fingers tightening around her purse strap. "I need stability," she said. "And right now, this situation around you doesn't feel stable." "Situation?" I repeated. She nodded. "People are talking. I can't have my business tied to something like that." "Something like what?" Her voice dropped. "A family dispute over money. It looks messy." "It's not what you think it is," I said. She gave me a small, tired smile. It doesn't matter what I think, it matters what everyone else thinks. That landed harder than anything else she could have said. I walked her to the door anyway. Old habit. Professional to the end. When she stepped outside, she paused. "I'm sorry," she said. Then she left. An hour later, I went to grab lunch. I should have stayed in. The diner on the corner was half full, the usual mix of locals and regulars. I had barely stepped inside when I felt it again, that shift, that quiet recalibration when a room notices you. I ordered anyway and took a seat at the counter. 2 stools down, a man I recognized from church glanced over. "You holding up all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. He gave a short nod, then leaned closer, voice dropping just enough to feel private. "Just seems strange, that's all, going after a family that took you in." I turned my head slowly. "I'm not going after anyone." He shrugged. "That's not how it looks." The waitress set my plate down between us, her movements a little too quick. "That's enough," she said quietly, not looking at either of us. But it wasn't enough. It was already out there, already decided. I left without finishing my meal. By the time I got back to the office, my phone had 3 missed calls, all from Virginia. I let it ring again when she called a 4th time, then answered. "You need to stop this now," she said. "No hello?" I replied. "Don't be difficult," she said. "You're making things worse for yourself." "I haven't said anything." "You don't have to," she said. "Your behavior is enough." "My behavior?" I repeated. "Yes, acting like you're entitled to something that was never yours." There it was, clearer than before. "I never asked for anything," I said. "You brought this into the open." "Because you forced me to," she said. "You've always had a way of pushing where you don't belong." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Is that what you tell people?" I asked. "That I pushed my way into this family?" "You were given a place," she said. "There's a difference." Given? Like it could be taken back. "I'm not apologizing," I said. "You will," she replied. "Or you will find out what it means to stand alone in a town like this." The line went quiet for a second after that. Not empty. Heavy. Then she hung up. I stared at my phone for a moment before setting it down. A few minutes later, it rang again. James. I almost didn't answer. "What?" I said when I did. "You need to calm down." "I am calm." "No, you're not. You're turning this into something it doesn't have to be." "It already is something. You just don't want to deal with it." He exhaled sharply. "Mom is trying to protect what matters." "From me?" "From chaos, from people talking." "They're talking because of her." "That's not how it works." "Then how does it work?" Silence. "She raised you," he said finally. "No," I said. "Dad did." Another pause. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Why didn't you look at me?" I asked. "What are you talking about?" "In the living room, you didn't look at me once." "That's not important." "It is to me." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice changed. "You're reading too much into things." "Am I?" Silence. Then he ended the call. That stayed with me longer than anything else. Not what he said, what he didn't. That night, I was sitting on my couch, the apartment too quiet, when I saw the post. A photo. The whole family standing on the front lawn of the farm, the house glowing behind them in soft evening light. Everyone was there, smiling, close, connected. Virginia stood slightly forward, her hand resting on James's arm. James stood where my father used to stand. I wasn't in it, not even at the edge. It looked clean, complete, like a version of the family that had never needed me. I zoomed in, studying it like I could find something hidden between the faces. Nothing, just absence. I set my phone down, but the image stayed with me. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about control anymore. This was about being erased. My phone buzzed again. A message from Virginia. "You are doing this to yourself." I stared at the words, then scrolled up without thinking. Past the recent messages, past the tension, back to something older, a message I had ignored at the time. Harold always believed in things he should not have. I read it once, then again. Back then, it sounded like criticism. Now it sounded like something else. If my father had believed something he should not have, then what was it? And why would she still be thinking about it years later? I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, phone in my hands. Everything around me felt different now. Not broken, shifted. Like I had been looking at the same picture my whole life, and someone had finally tilted it just enough to see what didn't fit. I wasn't going to argue with her. I wasn't going to chase down every rumor or correct every lie. That was her game, not mine. If she wanted control, she could keep it. What I wanted was the truth. And if it had been buried this deep for this long, then digging it up wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time since that day in the living room, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. And whatever she thought she had already secured, I had a feeling it wasn't as settled as she believed.
Chapter 3. I did not start with questions. I started with things I could hold in my hands. The box in the back of my closet had been there for years. I had moved it from apartment to apartment without opening it, like it belonged to a version of my life I did not need anymore. That morning, I carried it to the table and cut through the old tape. Paper, dust, time. Inside were albums, folders, loose envelopes. My father had kept everything, not in a sentimental way, but in a careful one, like he believed details mattered even when no one else did. I opened the first album and flipped slowly. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary days that once felt stable. My father behind the camera most of the time, steady and present. My mother always composed, always slightly ahead of everyone else. James in the center, easy, confident, exactly where he belonged. And me, close enough to be included, but never quite placed. I kept turning pages until something broke the pattern. A photo slipped loose from between two pages and fell onto the table. It was older than the rest, early 90s, judging by the colors and the clothes. My mother stood outside a construction site, her posture relaxed in a way I had never seen. Next to her was a man I did not recognize. He was not background. He was not incidental. He was standing beside her like he belonged there. I picked it up and looked closer. The angle of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders, the expression that sat somewhere between guarded and confident. Something about him felt familiar in a way I could not explain yet. I took a picture of the photo and called Diane Mercer. She answered quickly. "I figured you might find something," she said. "I found a photo," I replied. "My mother with a man I do not know. Construction site, early 90s. A pause. Describe him." I did. Another pause, longer this time. "That sounds like Nathan Whitaker," she said. "Who is he?" "He ran Whitaker Construction back then," she said. "Big contracts around the county. He was everywhere for a while." I looked back at the photo. Why would my mother be with him? Diane did not rush her answer. "Because she knew him," she said. "Knew him how?" Silence settled between us. "Diane?"
I heard things, she said finally. Nothing anyone would ever put their name on, but enough to make people notice. Notice what? That your father was not always the only one she was seen with. I closed my eyes for a second, letting that land. Did anyone ever say it out loud? Not in a way that mattered, she said. People here protect what keeps the town quiet. I ended the call and went back to the box. Now I was not just looking at pictures, I was looking for repetition. I pulled out another album, then another. I laid them across the table and started comparing them side by side. Dates, events, faces, who stood where, who looked at who. Nathan Whitaker appeared again. Once in the background of a town fair photo, once half cut out of the edge of a picture taken outside the courthouse. Always close, always just far enough to be ignored if you were not paying attention. I moved on to the folders. Receipts, invitations, community listings. My father had saved everything in neat stacks, labeled in his handwriting. I started matching dates. That was when the gaps showed up. Entire stretches where my mother did not appear anywhere. No events, no mentions, nothing in the records that usually tracked every small movement in a town like this. Weeks at a time, sometimes months. I wrote the dates down, lining them up next to project records from Whitaker Construction that I pulled up on my laptop. They overlapped. Not perfectly, but enough. My phone buzzed. James. I let it ring once before answering. What do you want? His voice came through quieter than usual. Are you really doing this? He asked. I am looking at what is already there, I said. Your mother says you're digging into things that do not concern you. I almost laughed. They concern me more than anyone. A pause. You're going to hurt yourself with this. Or I'm finally going to understand something. Another pause, heavier this time. Why are you asking about Nathan Whitaker? He said. I sat up a little straighter. So you do know the name. I've heard it, he said quickly. That doesn't mean anything. Then say it doesn't mean anything. Silence. James? I don't see what you're trying to prove. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to figure out why things don't line up. They line up fine, he said, but there was no weight behind it. Then why were there months where she disappeared from everything? Why does he show up in photos no one talks about? You're connecting things that are not connected. Then look at me and tell me that. He didn't respond. The line stayed open, but empty. That was all I needed. I'm doing a DNA test. His breath caught. That's not necessary. Maybe not for you. You're going too far. I don't think I've gone far enough. I ended the call. The next day, I went to the county records office. The place felt exactly as it always had. Quiet, slow, the kind of building where time moved differently. The clerk looked up when I walked in, her eyes narrowing slightly when I walked in. What are you looking for? Old permit records, I said. Early 90s, construction filings. She held my gaze for a second longer than comfortable. Those are archived, she said. Why do you need them? For client, I replied. She didn't look convinced. Don't remove anything from the files, she said. I won't. The back room smelled like paper and dust. Rows of shelves, boxes labeled in faded ink. I found the section I needed and started pulling records. Whitaker Construction. Project logs, permits, approvals. I worked quietly, but I could feel it, that sense of being watched. Once, I looked up and saw the clerk standing at the end of the aisle, pretending to organize something while her eyes stayed on me. I turned back to the files, matched dates again. Projects in one column, gaps in my mother's timeline in another. It wasn't proof, but it wasn't non-coincidence either. When I left, the air outside felt colder than it should have. In my car, I sat with my hands resting on the wheel, not starting the engine. My phone buzzed. An email. I stared at the screen. Your DNA results are ready. For a second, everything went quiet, not around me, inside me. This was the line. Once I crossed it, there was no returning to the version of my life that had existed before. No pretending, no ignoring, just the truth. Whatever it was. My thumb hovered over the screen. I thought about my father, about the way he had kept everything, like he believed one day it would matter. Then I opened the email.
Chapter 4. The file opened before I could talk myself out of it. For a moment, I just watched the screen load, my thumb hovering like I might still close it and pretend none of this had started. Then the results settled into place, sharp and clinical, no room for interpretation. I read the first line once, then again, slower. Biological relationship confirmed. Parent-child match. Harold Whitmore. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Not shock, not exactly. Something steadier than that. Something that felt like recognition. I was his daughter. Not the version Virginia had repeated for years, not the quiet correction people made behind polite smiles. His. I sat back in the driver's seat and closed my eyes for a second, letting that land somewhere deeper than words. I thought about the way he used to look at me when he thought I was not paying attention. The way he never explained himself, never defended it, just kept showing up in small, consistent ways. Maybe he had known, or maybe he had not needed proof. I opened my eyes and kept reading. The next section was shorter. Comparative analysis. No significant biological match detected. James Whitmore. I stared at the line, waiting for it to change. It did not. No match. Not partial, not distant. Nothing. A quiet laugh slipped out before I could stop it. Not because it was funny, because it was too clean, too final. Everything Virginia had built, every version of the story she had repeated until it felt permanent, collapsed in a few lines of text. I read the file again, slower this time, letting each word settle into place. Then I forwarded it. Not to everyone, just to 3 people who mattered. My Aunt Claire, my father's old attorney, Daniel Brooks, and the family group thread Virginia controlled like a gatekeeper. I did not add a message. I did not need to. The file spoke for itself. My phone buzzed before I even started the car. Claire, is this real? Yes. A pause, then a sharp inhale. I always wondered, she said quietly. He never said it out loud, but I could see it. I swallowed. I think he wanted it to speak for itself. Another pause, softer this time. She is not going to take this well. I know. The call ended and I drove straight to Daniel's office. He was already standing when I walked in, my email open on his screen. I was hoping you would come in, he said. You saw it. I did. He gestured for me to sit, then leaned forward, his expression focused in a way that felt different from before. This confirms what the trust already implies. Your father named you directly. That is not something that can be undone by opinion. So she cannot push me out. No, he said, she never had that power. She just made you believe she did. The words landed harder than I expected. James, I said. Daniel hesitated. Legally, his position is unchanged, but this will change how people see him and how they see her. That part mattered more. I left his office and stepped into the afternoon light, my phone already buzzing again. James, I answered. What is going on? He said. You saw it. I do not understand it.
You do, you just don't like what it says. He exhaled sharply. I'm coming over. Fine. He arrived 20 minutes later, barely waiting for me to open the door before stepping inside. He looked different. Not angry, not confident, unsteady. This is wrong, he said, holding up his phone. There has to be a mistake. There is not. My mother would not lie about something like this. I held his gaze. She lied about everything that made this possible. He shook his head, pacing once across the room. That doesn't make sense. It does if control was the point. He stopped, looking at me like he was seeing something he had avoided for a long time. I need the truth, he said. You have it. He sat down slowly, staring at the floor. This changes everything. I said it was always this way. Now it's just visible. My phone rang again. Virginia. I answered without moving. What did you do? She snapped. No greeting, no control. I verified the truth. You had no right. I had every right. That's not the truth, she said, her voice sharp, almost desperate. I let the silence stretch for a second. Then why are you afraid of it? Her breathing came through the line, uneven now. You don't understand what you are interfering with. I understand exactly what I am looking at. Her voice dropped lower, colder. You think this makes you his daughter. You were a mistake he never fixed. The words hung there. James looked up, his face going still. Something inside me settled. Not anger, clarity. He fixed it, I said quietly. You just couldn't control it. You're going to regret this. No, I said. You are. I ended the call. The room felt different after that. Heavier, but clearer. James sat there, his hands clasped together like he was trying to hold something in place. What happens now? He asked. I looked at my phone. More notifications were coming in, names I hadn't heard from in years, people who had seen the file, who had drawn their own conclusions without needing me to explain. It already started, I said. He followed my gaze, his expression tightening as another message came through. They know, he said. Yes. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. My mother cannot control this. No, I said. She cannot. I picked up my phone and opened the thread again, watching the responses stack one after another. Questions, reactions, silence from the one person who had always filled the space first. For the first time, she had nothing. And for the first time, I did not need to say anything else. The truth was already doing the work.
Chapter 5. The next morning did not feel dramatic. It felt settled, like something had finally stopped shifting under my feet. My phone was quiet, not because people stopped talking, but because the answers were already there. No one needed to guess anymore. No one needed to pick a side based on whispers. They had the truth. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the light come up over the yard. For years, I had woken up bracing for whatever version of reality Virginia decided to push that day. Now, there was nothing left for her to shape. That was the difference. Not silence. Clarity. Claire called just after 9. It is everywhere, she said. Family, church, even people who never paid attention before. I figured it would spread. It already has, she said, and people are not reacting the way she expected. I leaned against the counter. How is she handling it? Claire let out a quiet breath. She tried to show up at church this morning. People were polite, but no one stayed to talk. Pastor Andrews spoke about truth and accountability. He never said her name, but he did not have to. I closed my eyes for a second. That sounds about right. She left early, Claire added. I have never seen her do that. That was the first real crack. Not anger, not confrontation, just absence. After the call, I drove into town, more out of habit than anything else. I needed to see how the world looked now that everything had shifted. At the diner, a few heads turned when I walked in. Not in a dramatic way, just enough to let me know people knew. Martha was behind the counter. She poured coffee and set it in front of me without asking. "He always treated you like you belonged," she said. "I know." She nodded once. "Some things do not need to be explained. People see them anyway." That word again. See. It had never been about convincing anyone, just removing the cover. When I left, two women by the door went quiet for a second, then one of them gave me a small nod. Not pity, not curiosity, recognition. That was new. By the time I got home, Daniel had already left me a message. I called him back. "It is finalized," he said. "What is?" "The trust. Everything has been reviewed with the new information. There is no dispute left." I let that settle. And her control over it. "Gone," he said. "She can no longer direct how anything moves through James. The structure defaults back to what your father intended." That mattered more than any number. "Do I need to do anything?" "You have the right to request a full redistribution," he said. "Legally, you could take the majority." I walked into the living room and sat down. "And if I don't?" "Then things remain balanced," he said, "the way he designed them." I did not need to think about it. "I'm keeping what's mine," I said, "and I'm leaving his part intact." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "That's a choice," he said. "I know. And not an easy one. It's the right one." When the call ended, I set the phone down and sat there for a while. This was the part people misunderstand about revenge. It's not always about taking something. Sometimes it's about deciding what you refuse to become. James showed up that evening. He looked like he had been somewhere far away, even though he was standing right in front of me. I went back to the house. I knew which one he meant. "And?" He let out a breath. "She's still trying to control it," he said. "Calling people, telling them the results are wrong, that you manipulated something." I almost smiled. "Is it working?" He shook his head. "No one is listening." That was the second crack. Not loud, final. "I don't know who I am without that story," he said. "You get to find out." He stepped inside, slower this time. "I talked to Daniel, too. He told me what you decided." I watched him carefully. "And?" "Why would you do that?" he asked. "You could take everything." "Because I could. Because part of me had imagined it, just for a second, watching her lose it all, watching him stand there with nothing. But that was never what my father built. He chose you, not because of blood, because he wanted to." James looked down, his hands tightening slightly. "I don't deserve that." "This is not about deserve." He nodded slowly. "I spent my whole life thinking I had to defend something. Turns out it was never mine to protect. No, it was hers." He let that sit. "I'm done letting her decide who I am." That was the third crack, the one that mattered. After he left, the house felt different again. Not tense, not uncertain, just steady. A few days later, I drove out to the farm. The road was the same. The gate still stuck the same way when I pushed it open. Nothing there had changed, and somehow that made everything else feel real. This was where he had been himself, not in the house Virginia controlled, not in the version of family she constructed. Here. I walked past the barn and out toward the back field, the grass moving slightly in the breeze. I could almost see him there, hands in his pockets, looking out like he had all the time in the world. For years, I thought I had lost something, a place, a name, a version of my life that had been taken before I understood it. But standing there, it was clear. Nothing had been taken. It had just been hidden behind someone else's story. And now that story was gone. I was still here, still his, still standing in something real.
I turned back toward the house as the lights started to shift, long shadows stretching across the ground. I didn't feel like I had won something. I felt like I had stopped losing. And that was enough. If you were in my place, would you have taken everything and called it justice? Or would you have left part of it untouched, even knowing what it cost you? Because in the end, family isn't just about blood, it's about what you choose to protect when the truth finally shows up. If this story meant something to you, stay with me, share your thoughts below, and follow along for more stories that might feel a little closer to your own.